All right, Assalamu alaikum, everybody.
17.
We're good to go? Sure? Okay, Assalamu alaikum. Happy Tuesday. Yesterday was a really special day for me because it was my Muslim birthday, and it's like my half-life Muslim birthday. So now I converted when I was 27, and now I've been Muslim 27 years. So I can like say it's been half my life, which is really cool. So we had a nice movie night here, and it was very special, especially because we were used to, pre-COVID, going to the movies like literally every weekend, multiple times a weekend, and we haven't gone anywhere since everything shut down. So it was just really lovely. Thank you to everybody for setting that up. And so, of course, you know, like these kinds of occasions make me think back to my early convert days and just a lot of like warm memories of awkwardness and, you know, things that now are just look so different, of course, you know, 27 years later. But I thought I would just share some of these gems. I've been trying to focus some of my stories around the convert experience because I really want to encourage people not to be afraid to be converts or to be nice to converts, so, or to talk to converts. Because if you're a convert or you know converts, you know what ends up happening is after the 2 seconds of glory when you meet Muslims, after that you actually don't, you know, it's like no one talks to you again. So you're sort of left on your own to your own devices. But alhamdulillah, because then you have more time to talk to God, and that's what's really important. But I remember just like sort of random stories. I was just sort of praying, I'm like, God, please help me think of the right stories to share, because there's so many, and so I'll share more as we go. But I remember the first time I went back, I went to high school with someone that many of you may know, Professor Asifa Qureshi. She's a professor in Wisconsin. And we went to high school together, and it was funny because I knew her from middle school, and she used to wear hijab. And at that time, you know, as a teenager, right, you look at things that are weird and you just assume that people are weird. And so I remember like when seeing her wear a scarf, and remember during PE, we used to do those like tests where you would have to run a mile and they would like, you know, evaluate how good your physical state was. And she couldn't do them, I remember, because there was one time where she was fasting and it was during Ramadan. And I thought, oh God, what a weird person, and who would wear a scarf and all of that? And this went on through high school. So, you know, to my chagrin, of course, then 10 years later, you know, when I actually converted to Islam, I thought to myself, oh my God, this woman had the secret that I had been searching for my entire life. And how could I, you know, like I was so excited to meet her again and apologize. And, you know, we met at our high school 10-year reunion, and actually we connected because I met her friend, another famous person named Moja Kaf, who is a poet that many people may know. She was someone that I met in my early days as a convert. And so Moja and Asifa were very close friends, and they kind of talked. And so I was very excited in my mind to meet up with Asifa again at our reunion, which was held at a bar in downtown Palo Alto. So I show up at the bar, and, you know, I don't wear hijab. I look pretty much the same as I did in high school. So I think everyone just assumed that I was the same, which to me, of course, you know, anyone who thinks back on their high school days is just mortified with like who they were as a high school student, and that I'm no exception to that rule. So I was looking for Asifa, and found her on the second floor of the bar, and, you know, everyone was there, and she looked at me and she said, oh my God, you are the last person I ever thought would have converted to Islam. And I was sort of shocked, and I didn't quite know how to process that, so I sort of set it aside. And then I was just very happy to talk to her, and I just assumed that she would be my best friend, and, you know, because now we had, you know, something in common. And so she basically gave me her business card and said, nice to see you again. And I didn't see her the rest of the night. Not any shame on Asifa, of course. She probably assumed I was still the same, you know, weird person in high school. But it was just funny because it's like, you know, when you enter a situation and you feel like you literally look the same on the outside, right? So everyone assumes there's nothing different about you, but you know that everything inside of you has changed. It's an interesting thing, especially you just don't identify, you don't look Muslim in any way, you don't act Muslim in any way, and of course you're in a bar, so, you know, you're like already doing something that's kind of questionable, and as a convert you don't really know, like, okay, what do I do? What does that mean? So that was one sort of funny memory. Another funny memory, of course, is I converted during the month of Ramadan, and so I think I've shared my story before about how that happened, and maybe I'll share that another time. But the funny thing is I remember the night that I had, like, since I converted, and the person said to me, okay, it's Ramadan and you need to fast starting tomorrow. And I was working in my corporate job, and I had never probably missed a meal in my life. So I was thinking to myself, okay, what could I eat that will last me through the day? Like, the idea of fasting is just like so strange. So I remember sitting like at 4 o'clock in the morning at my table with like a grilled cheese sandwich and mustard. So that was my first meal as like a convert. And then I remember, like, you know, we had a meeting at, you know, I was working at J&J. We had this big meeting, and the whole company was gathered for lunchtime. And I was so hungry, like, I swear my stomach was like screaming. It was so hungry. Like, it was just really one of these things that I will like never forget. And, you know, it's like, you know, it was a long time that I was a convert before I met the professor. And so, you know, as I said, I came to Islam through books and, you know, reading and not really interacting with Muslims at all, never having stepped foot in a mosque. So it was definitely a surprise when I did go to the mosque for the first time, and, you know, was hearing a lot of Wahhabi kinds of things. And I remember, like, you know, asking people, I mean, I would get in regular conversations about, you know, I mean, of course, if you're a convert, the two things that really hit you are, one, you have to wear hijab. Like, immediately, you know, everyone comes out of the woodwork and starts telling you have to wear hijab. And then secondly, just that, you know, you're not really supposed to question things. I mean, I learned that very early on. Like, I would ask a lot of questions about things. Like, for example, you know, well, what if I thought hijab was meant for protection. So what happens if wearing the hijab actually makes you more of a target? And people really did not like those kinds of questions. And I had a whole, like, laundry list of those types of questions. So I think it was like, and, you know, it was hard for someone who is, you know, thinking and coming at the religion in a very different way, because you don't have anything to base your, you know, your reasons for doing things on, except for what people tell you. I mean, and your brain, you know. So it was a little bit of a disconnect when people were not really interested in answering those types of questions or felt uncomfortable. So that was, you know, very interesting. And I remember, of course, even, you know, like the process of, you know, I'm going to go back a little bit, you know, like thinking about becoming a Muslim was very interesting. I remember, like, I've shared that I started looking into faith and into, you know, my like, what's the purpose of life, you know, really seriously once I got to business school. And it was very interesting because it was like at the time when you are immersed in a culture, you know, business school culture, where it's really about money and success and getting ahead and, you know, competing with people to get the best interviews and the best jobs, and, you know, and then you really get hit with, you know, is this really all there is? And so I think that question of, you know, what is the purpose of life and what is the meaning of life really came to the fore. And then plus I was away from my family, you know, in a, like, clear across the country. So I was free to do what I wanted to do and not worry about, you know, how I would impact my family or my parents or things like that. So all those things were really important. And I remember, you know, so I guess another aspect of the story is, you know, of course, when you're, most people drink before they convert. And I was, you know, I would drink and I would go to these business school types of, you know, like gatherings where you're networking and meeting people and socializing and all of that. And, you know, I went to college at Berkeley, so clearly people drink a lot there, everywhere, of course. And I remember, so when I got to Cornell Business School and I met a couple of classmates, one of the classmates of mine prayed 5 times a day, and that was really, like, you know, eye-opening for me, because it was like, why in the world would anyone pray 5 times a day? That was just really shocking. Like, what would make someone have that type of a conviction? And it really left an impact with me. And I, at that point, felt like, well, maybe that's what's been missing in my life, you know, because I felt like at that point very lost and very unanchored in our terminology now, and just felt, you know, depressed and anxious. Every day was kind of like, you know, you just sort of wish that I hope today's a good day, and maybe it would be and maybe it wouldn't be, but you were just kind of carried by the wind of chance, you know. And so you make a lot of decisions based on sort of this American mindset of materialism and, you know, success and just whatever, you know, selfish things that you want that will make you happy or that you think will get you ahead. And clearly that led to a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of bad decisions. And so all of a sudden I was looking at my classmates going, you know, why do these people all look like they have it together? And I feel so like such the imposter, right? I was hit with such a severe case of imposter syndrome. And then so when I met, you know, my classmate who prayed 5 times a day, I was like, okay, maybe religion is what's missing here, you know? And that was kind of what was interesting, that sparked my interest in Islam and led to me finding a book and checking it out, Muhammad Maulana Ali's book on the religion of Islam, so in case anyone's interested. And so I remember my Muslim classmate challenging me the first Thanksgiving, going back home and saying, you know, are you going to drink alcohol when you go back for your Thanksgiving dinner? And, you know, and I said, yeah, I think so. I think my parents will probably serve wine. And so he said, well, what if you don't? You know, and it sort of stuck with me and it planted a seed. And so I went home and I didn't drink, and I never drank again after that. And I wasn't even Muslim. So that was like for 2.5 years before I even converted, I had stopped. And so it's sort of interesting. It's like the things that you think that are important to you and the things that you think you can't let go of. When you actually start experimenting and wondering, you know, questioning, like, how important really is this to me? How much of my world is tied to the things that I've always assumed? You know, like we've talked here in the surahs about, you know, your world, everything that you tie your world to. And how the Quran comes in and says, you know what, all of those things are really not important. That is exactly the process that you go through as a convert, and it's a very surprising process that I think is also, you know, like when you start taking this path and you make your intention to God, I think God starts with you on that journey and starts helping you decide what can kind of be peeled away and what can be tested and what can be let go of. And I know that after 2.5 years of this process of trying different things, I even remember the first night I was like, okay, I want to just feel what it's like to put my head on the floor in sujood. And it was the strangest feeling. Like, it was just weird. It's like, you know, I can't even describe it. It's like if you thought you could fly, you jumped out a window. It was like that weird. But, you know, it was just very curious. And so, you know, 2.5 years of this sort of discovery of like, what can you keep, what can you let go of, what's really important to you, you know, I mean, I think I knew probably at least, you know, 6 months to a year into my journey of reading that Islam was the truth. Like, it felt right to me, but I just, as I have said before, I wasn't ready to make that commitment. And by the time I reached the night that I converted, I had no intention of converting. It was like I had signed up for an Islamic adult school class. I talked about that once before. I'll share that story some other time. But someone came to meet me to answer questions for me, and then pushed me to convert. And, you know, when I think about that, it's like I was just floating for a very long time. I had no interest in converting. I had no reason to convert. I was perfectly fine. And it was like God came and just sort of like kicked me and said, okay, this is it. Tonight's the night. Boom. And tomorrow you start fasting. And, you know, and I was so happy. And because God knew that I was ready. And so God facilitated that moment. And there have been just so many moments like that along the way that they're countless, you know. And I think even when you look back on them and you recognize, you know, times that you maybe didn't think God was there and God actually was in hindsight, it's a really incredible feeling. And so it's, you know, then I think more than anything, you feel like you're not alone. And I think people in this society really are struck with the loneliness of this life. And if there's one thing that I think Islam has, you know, or my relationship with God has really comforted me in, is that I'm not alone. And you know, the other night, we were chatting with a few of us here, and the professor was explaining that I've become more and more fanatic since my conversion. And someone also said that, you know, they could hear the passion in me of, after 27 years of being a convert, still can hear that spark of, like, you know, early convert days. And I felt like that was the nicest thing that they could have said, because you know, I feel so grateful that I was allowed to become Muslim, and this journey of knowledge and experience has made me more fanatic, because it has made me more sure and made me feel very secure in my, you know, natural tendency to want to question and even argue and stand up and, you know, and like even fight with people if I have to, because I feel like I'm standing up for something that is right or just. You know, I rub people, certain people, the wrong way because I get very passionate. But, you know, in thinking about it, I'm unapologetic about it because, I mean, I try to be nice, I try not to be mean, and if I go too far, I try to apologize. But because I feel like this journey is one that I take for God, and everything that I do is for God, to pay back that gratitude. Because I understand, like, the whole, when we talk about going from darkness to light, I lived in darkness for 25 years, and that is a horrible place to be. And once you've been in that darkness and you've been in the light, you never want to go back. And so, you know, if you can spend every day paying back for the gratitude, you know, through service, through, you know, anything that you can do for God, you still feel like you can't pay it back enough because you know what the alternative is. So for that, I just, you know, always, I'm such an advocate for conversion. And even like, okay, so I'll finish with the last story, which is really sweet. So Mito, I've said many times, goes to Catholic school. And the other day, and every so often he'll come and he'll ask me really random, like, teenage questions. So he'll say, so Mom, you know, when you were a teenager, or he'll say, did you ever hear of this alcohol name? Because I know before you're a Muslim, you used to drink, right? And then he would tell me the name. I don't even remember what it was. This was just the other day. And I'm like, no, I've never heard of that. And then he was saying to me, you know, I was doing a little bit of research. He's like, you know, I go to school and, you know, all my classmates are Christian, but none of them really are into it. They don't really believe, you know. And so I started doing a little research on my own. Did you know that more Christians are leaving the faith than ever? And it's not because their parents did a bad job. It's because they did such a good job of teaching them about Jesus, and it doesn't make sense to them. So they're leaving and they're questioning. And I thought, whoa, that is really amazing. And I was very proud of him for being like smart and inquisitive, you know, and I try to keep sort of that open, you know, like line of communication where I hope he can ask me all kinds of weird things like that. But, you know, that to me, you know, like, and if you get my weekly email, I made a point about saying, you know, children of converts, you know, it's like you think a lot about trying to create an environment where children can grow up, like, feeling free to ask questions and loving their religion and believing, you know, it was an opportunity for me to say, well, you know, the reason why is because, you know, what we teach here is about building your relationship with God and, you know, thinking of God as your friends. And that's just, there's no place for that, you know, with between the confusion of, you know, Trinity and all the other things that, you know, his classmates, it doesn't resonate with them. So anyway, you know, these are just some of the musings of, like, you know, thinking back of the conversion journey, and they're really special. And again, I'm just very grateful for this whole experience, and I hope to share more funny, interesting stories over time. So that's it. And just a quick bit of housekeeping that maybe I should have started with is just that thank you for people who have written to me asking about how they can donate and what our fundraising priorities are. I am trying to figure out how to best communicate that through, you know, our website, and how to maybe set up a way to donate so people can, you know, donate to things that they're interested in. So I'm still working on that. In the meantime, you know, so our main priorities obviously are the Project Illumine tafsir project, and I'll break out some of the costs for that, and then also the library. So we have, you know, a lot of bookcases that we need to buy, because a lot of our bookcases, you know, after being living with us for 25 plus years, didn't make the move. They kind of crumbled because they're made out of particle board, and, you know, there's some of them are even student bookcases, so they just are not meant to survive probably 25 years, and also you know, a trip from California to Ohio. So we definitely have a need, even for people who want to donate, you know, $150 for a bookcase. And adopt a bookcase or several bookcases. And, you know, we're thinking about cool ideas of even putting little placards to say this bookcase was donated by such and such person. So things like that. And with Ramadan coming up, you know, we're hoping to make more opportunities for people to help us with this very important project. So thank you so much, and looking forward to another incredible evening. May Allah bless us.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, Surah Al-Inshiqaq, it is, Surah Al-Inshiqaq is most likely a late Meccan revelation. most authorities agree that it was revealed in the late Meccan period, and it was revealed directly after Surah Al-Infitar. So in order of revelation, it is somewhere in the low 80s. So the 80th something surah of the Quran to be revealed, 83, 82, 84, something like that. Anyway, so it was revealed after Surah Al-Infitar, and this makes it a surah that, although short, was revealed after Tur, after Surah Sajdah, definitely after Surah Fatir, after Surah Rahman, so and also after Surah Maryam, Surah Ibrahim. So after a most of the Meccan surahs had been already revealed. For me, that always begs a question of, so what did this particular surah add to what has already been revealed? What was the objective of the surah in light of what we already know has been revealed in the Quran? And I think this is actually, methodologically, that is an important point when we try to understand each revelation. Now, in terms of occasion for revelation, there isn't much. There are some reports that claim that it was revealed in response to this event or that event, but these reports are so unreliable that most of the tafsir don't even mention these reports at all. And if you look long enough or you study hard enough and long enough, you encounter them, but they are not even mentioned by most of the mainstream tafsir because they're not reliable occasions for revelations. But we will see, inshallah, that the surah actually makes a very important intervention as Muslims, now having gone through the Isra al-Mi'raj and the test that the Isra al-Mi'raj presented, and they haven't quite, the first migration to Abyssinia had already taken place, but obviously the migration to Medina had not taken place. And Surah Al-Inshiqaq seems to have been revealed even before the events of the Prophet ﷺ with the folks from Ta'if, his attempt to reach out to other cities other than Yathrib to get their support, to no avail. And these attempts often ended up very unpleasantly for the Prophet ﷺ. So there are certain surahs in the Quran that just literally strike you by how limitless the layers of meaning within the surah are. And Surah Al-Inshiqaq is one of these, and as we will see inshallah. So it starts out straightforwardly enough, إِذَا السَّمَاءُ انشَقَّتْ. If the sky, if the sky, and it's here, it is the earthly sky, is rendered asunder, or if, how did he put, yeah, rent asunder, yeah, that's good enough. Rent asunder, and shaqqat, literally, shaqq shay means to split something. And do we know what the splitting of a sky can look like? The obvious answer is no, we don't. But it is a clear statement that the sky that envelopes the earth will disintegrate and will break apart. وَأَذِنَتْ لِرَبِّهَا وَحُقَّتْ. This expression is one of the most eloquent expressions that you find in the Quran. وَأَذِنَتْ لِرَبِّهَا وَحُقَّتْ. The Quran consistently speaks about nature as if a living, breathing thing that has a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And while we see nature as the sum total of whatever biological and physical properties that nature has, but consistently in the Quran we find that Allah speaks about nature as a living, existing thing that has a relationship with the divine. And here in Surah Al-Inshiqaq, once again, it's like the surah where Allah speaks about that we offered the trust to the heavens and the earth refused to carry it, but human beings carried it, and so on. We will encounter this quite often in the Quran, but here, وَأَذِنَتْ لِرَبِّهَا وَحُقَّتْ. أذنت, it's as if, let me see. It acknowledged its obligation towards the Lord. If you want a literal translation of adhinat, it's as if the sky surrounding the earth has now received the Lord's command, and it dutifully obeys by undergoing the transformations that it will undergo at this point. Huqqat is in Arabic we say hukka fulan bikaza, meaning that it becomes obligatory, or a person is duty bound to do such and such. So for instance, when one of the Quranic verses says حقيق علي أن لا أقول إلا الحق, that it is obligatory upon me that I don't speak but the truth. It's the same root. So أذنت لربها وحقت, it is as if the sky responds to God by not receiving marching orders, but by acknowledging its relationship with the divine and saying, yes, now it is my job to come to an end. The disintegration of the skies that envelop the earth is a common theme at the end of times that we find repeated in the Quran in different forms. Which, of course, raises some very interesting points, because in the Quranic view, the sky surrounding the earth is artificially maintained for the preservation of human life. And so it is there as long as God wants human life in the way that it is, but is no longer there when reality changes. وإذا الأرض مدت وألقت ما فيها وتخلت وأذنت لربها وحقت. So first the literal rendering of these words. Literally, الأرض مدت, if the earth is expanded or stretched out. There are some unreliable reports that say that the earth will expand to make space for all the people in resurrection who, for all the people will be resurrected, but these reports are very unreliable, and so we can't count on any of them. But Al-Ardu Muddat, one of the most fascinating things, I was once reading, and here a scientist is required, it's not my field, but I was reading an article, I think it was in National Geographic or something like that, about what would happen if the earth loses its gravity, or the type of transformations that would occur for the earth to lose even a little bit of the gravitational force that it has. And a lot of what I was reading reminded me very much of this ayah, that the reality of the earth itself, the ground upon which we stand, although it is, the literal translation is expanded or stretched out. And so a lot of commentators say, well, that probably means earthquakes. Other commentators said, well, that probably means total and utter upheaval in the earth. But the most fascinating, and I don't, to be quite honest, remember which commentary, but it must have been a modern one, someone who went ahead and tied that to the ground, or to Earth losing its gravitational force. That part of that are the transformation, and that I'm tempted to. It must have been one of the modern ones. So I'm tempted to say Shanqiti or Tantawi or maybe even say it Qutb, but I can't remember, and I couldn't find it. But I didn't have enough time to look as thoroughly as I would have liked. But it's a fascinating expression, consistent with a theme that the Quran always invokes about the coming of the end, and that is the very nature of reality changing. That reality is no longer what any of us would recognize it to be. So the earth stretches or expands, meaning the earth completely changes its reality. The ground is in a complete state of upheaval. In our language today, the ozone layer is no longer there. Whatever maintains oxygen around the earth and the function that we associate with earthly life is no longer there, and the nature of the ground and land itself transforms as earth loses gravitational force. And again, وَأَذِنَتْ لِرَبِّهَا وَحُقَّتْ, Allah re-emphasizing that this is not a happenstance, but in a direct relationship to the divine. Now, as we will see, that will be tied to the end of the surah, when Allah tells us that you will, in fact, inhabit different realities as we go through processes of transformation. يا أيها الإنسان إنك كادح إلى ربك كدحا فملاقيه. So after this powerful image and a quick reminder that already by the time the Surah Al-Inshiqaq is revealed, we have had several descriptions of the end of times that emphasize very similar themes, except that Surah Al-Inshiqaq here underscores something that already the Quran had addressed, and that don't think that material reality is unresponsive or dead or just a physical, empirical thing. But in fact, it is in a direct relationship with Allah, with its maker. And that when the word comes, that material reality will transform itself. And right after this introduction, we get one of the most eloquent, powerful, impactful statements of the Quran about human life. يا أيها الإنسان إنك كادح إلى ربك كدحا فملاقيه. كادح إلى ربك كدحا, you couple of things. You will be in a constant state, or you are indeed and will continue to be in a constant state of struggle. Struggle and labor. وَكَادِحٌ إِلَى رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا, you are also in a constant state of motion and transformation. Whether you believe in God or not, whether you accept God or not, whether you're Muslim or not, here it is talking about insan, human beings. All of you human beings, your reality is you are in a constant state of toil, labor, and transformation until you meet your Lord. Now, that expression connotes a lot of things. The various stages in life that we go through from birth, and as so many commentators said, that you in fact are on the journey to meet your Lord from the very first breath that you take after being born. That the counter is ticking off, breath after breath, from the day that you're born. The various stages of transformation are like the transformation of the heavens and the earth, involved by the sunnah that Allah has created in creation. Pain and labor and transformation and motion. You go from childhood to adulthood to old age to death. Why would you think that the transformations would come to an end upon your death? The very logic of the maker of this world is a constant evolution from one state to another. Why do you think that somehow you would be, that the end of the story would be simply death? What comes beyond meeting our Lord can only be told to us by our Lord, because we have no way of gleaning that reality. Furthermore, كَادِحٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا, your various stages of highs and lows, from being poor to being rich, to being in need, to being healthy, to being ill, nothing remains the same. Motion and change is the law that God encoded in creation itself. I once read, I think it was a modern fellow who commented, and he's a physics specialist in physics, and was commenting on this Quranic outlook, and said that it wasn't until fairly recently that we understood the extent to which life depends on motion. But in the Quranic outlook, we consistently see this, that motion is, and change and transformation is the logic of the divine. And that you could try to deny it, or you could try to resist it only at your own peril. Some even from, as we'll see in a little bit, some, especially within the Sufi-esque outlooks, said, إِنَّكَ كَادِحٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا فَمُلَاقِيهِ is yet another Quranic reference that if you want طريق الارتقاء, if you want the path of elevation to the Lord, it cannot be attained without serious toil and serious exertion and serious work. That the nature of creation itself rejects lethargy and rejects what is the expression? What is the word I'm looking for? Like when you basically get things for nothing, you're handed handouts. Rejects the very idea of handouts itself. That those who want to turn effectively handouts or entitlement into a philosophy of life are going against the very logic of the divine. Okay. So you will, and furthermore, your going back to the Sufi-esque outlooks, but not just the Sufis, because you find it also in so many of the mainstream tafsir that make the same point, that if your attitude towards life is one that is an outlook that basically assumes that you are entitled to your comforts, that when Allah tells you about those who are going to be handed their records in their right and those who are going to be handed their records behind their backs, when Allah says إِنَّكَ كَادِحٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا فَمُلَاقِيهِ, that Allah is also putting you on notice that if your attitude towards life is that I am entitled to my comforts, I am entitled to what I'm entitled to, the chances are extremely high that you are going to be among those handed your record behind your back. In other words, you're going to be among the losers. That Ashab al-Yamin, the people of the right, are people who understand the logic of toiling for the divine and toiling in the path of the divine. A lot of commentators extrapolating on that also note that this is also why those who you find that those who truly that those who are close to Allah on this earth are often people who are subjected to the hardest tests. They're often people who are afflicted with the most severe tests and the most severe suffering. Because that's the nature of the way that you learn and the way that you grow and the way that you transform and the way that you move forward. That this, and it's subhanAllah, I mean, in the past, the commentators would say something like the attitude of royalty and the Ashabul Mulk, the people who live in palaces, of being entitled to the comforts of the world. This is what Allah is pointing our attention to, that these people are, in our day and age, that attitude has become a contagion. I mean, it's no longer people who live in palaces. Anyone that lives in a so-called first world country or an industrialized nation, at least upper middle class, high class, maybe even middle class, I don't know. That sense of entitlement to, well, I'm entitled to my comforts and I'm entitled to my rhythm of life, and don't disrupt me, don't challenge me, don't come and take me out of my comfort zone. So, إِنَّكَ كَادِحٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا فَمُلَاقِيهِ. And the expression kadh is remarkable, because kadh is not just minor exertion. Kadh literally is, what you describe as kadh is burdensome, back-breaking work. That's what a kadh is. So, if I say أكدح في طلب العيش, means I work really hard to make a living. Someone who's very rich can't say أكدح في طلب العيش. It would be just not a correct use of language. أكدح في طلب العيش means, I labor really hard to make a living. So the Quranic expression كادح إلى ربك كدحا فملاقيه is amazing. Now, of course, in hindsight, we can understand a lot of why Surah Al-Inshiqaq comes in and says this. When we know what those people who are going to go on the hijrah and the fact that they are going to have to fight by the time the Prophet ﷺ dies, they're going to be involved in some 6 major battles and something like 20 small skirmishes. Military campaigns, and even if you didn't get involved in the military campaigns because of your age or because of your gender or because of whatever, you were still going to be supporting those who are engaged in military campaigns. We understand why Surah Al-Inshiqaq is telling people your attitude should be one of kath, one of very hard labor. But that, of course, is in hindsight. And notice that Surah Al-Inshiqaq talks to insan, to human beings. It doesn't talk to يا أيها المؤمنين إنكم كادحون إلى ربكم كدحا فملاقوه. It doesn't say the believers, it doesn't say followers of Muhammad, it's human beings. Okay, and then the result of that those, when they meet their Lord, either you're going to be among those who are on the right hand or among those who are on the, in this case, instead of left hand, it says those who receive their account behind their backs. Now, of course, as you might know, that the word sinister itself, in Latin, and as in the old, in all the old languages, including Latin, the left path, until even today, when you talk about the left path, that's a demonic path. If you're a Satan worshiper, you're a follower of the left path. If you are, that's a term of art, still in use today. But in Latin, the word sinister also means the left path. So in old language, left was symbolically a construct for bad, and right was symbolically a construct for the right. It has nothing to do with left-handed or right-handed, but that's my point. And in this point here, when it says those فَأَمَّا مَنْ أُوتِيَ كِتَابَهُ بِيَمِينِهِ, does it mean that those who are going to hold their book in their right hand? My answer is no. It doesn't. Biyamine means whatever the way that you're going to be holding your book is going to be a blessed record. Now, whether you hold it in your mouth, whether you hold it under your armpit, whether you hold it on top of your chest, whether you carry it over your head, all of that is biyamine, if it's good. To insist that, it's about holding it with the right hand is silly. And it's an impoverishment, a deprecation of the Arabic language. وَيَنْقَلِبُ إِلَى أَهْلِهِ مَسْرُورًا. Now note here, إِلَى أَهْلِهِ, that you will receive the good tidings, the good news, that you will hardly be held to account. So these are the people who are either clearly, they have clear winning records, or people who have committed small marginal sins that Allah forgives, and you know, they're small sins that can be overlooked and Allah forgives, and you get the good news. وَيَنْقَلِبُ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهِ مَسْرُورًا, that then you go back, and أهله here, it could mean your relatives, meaning that members of your family that are also in heaven or who also have the good news, so you celebrate together. Or it could mean your people, so fellow believers. So the idea is that the happiness is not just going to be individual, but communal. Unlike the misery of punishment, which is very lonely. And one of the things that we consistently get in the Quran is that while al-jihad fi sabilillah, while being a mujahid in Allah's way, will entail often a great deal of loneliness on this earth, in the hereafter it's reversed. It is those who are do not attain salvation are the ones who are going to experience a great deal of loneliness, and the ones who attain salvation will actually have a great deal of communal companionship and fraternity. If you notice throughout the Quran, the idea of fraternity or companionship is completely absent for those who do not attain salvation. When they are with others, they're fighting with others. They're angry with others. They're bickering with others. And if they're not bickering and fighting, they're alone. This is, by the way, consistent. I mean, this is a weird side note, but, you know, those who have tried to, you know, there was a while in Egypt where, and I don't know if it still is the case, but there was a while in Egypt where worshipping Satan was in vogue. There were, you know, most of them were kids who were, of course, the kids of rich people who have gone to American schools or British schools or whatever, and they would get into Satan worshipping, and they would often get books in English most of the time, left-hand path books or the Satanic Bible or stuff like that, and they would go off in the desert and have rituals and so on. And the kids who have had that experience, I mean, one of the most common thing you hear from people who've walked this path and got stung by it is the remarkable feeling of loneliness and despair. And that's very common with the demonic path, loneliness and despair. And I don't think that's a coincidence. Okay. So, now those who receive their books behind their backs. Now, why behind their backs? Why didn't it say those who received their books on the left, as it says elsewhere in the Quran? There are some reports that say that there's a report that's not reliable that says that the reason that they were received behind their backs is that they're going to have one hand, their left hand or their left arm shackled behind them, but that's not reliable. There's a report that say that they will receive it in the left, but then out of shame they will be hiding it behind their back. Other reports that go back to the Prophet ﷺ, but that go back to companions of the Prophet that say that, interestingly, I think these are actually the most reliable reports, is that they will not be given the honor of receiving the record face to face. You'll literally be handed it behind you. So Um, okay. So those who receive it behind them, فسوف يدعو ثبورا. يدعو ثبورا. Thubur is a lamentation when you say, when you scream out Ya Waili or Ya Wailati, it's an exclamation of sorrow and fear and terror. It's not, when you say Ya Waili or Ya Wailati, it's not that you're really saying help me. You're saying, oh my God, I'm lost. Oh my God, I am doomed. When you say help me, you still have hope that you get help. But when you say Ya Waili or Ya Wailati, you've even lost. So again, that theme of despair. You even lost any inclination of hope. There is no hope. So the only thing left is to start exclaiming and wailing. So it's literally, oh my God, I'm in big trouble. وَيَصْلَ سَعِيرًا, and they will be punished. إِنَّهُ كَانَ فِي أَهْلِهِ مَسْرُورًا. This is 13. Truly among his people or his family, he was joyful. This, I'm just going to pause on this for 1 second and say that not just Surah Al-Inshiqaq, but we find this, for instance, in Surah Al-Mutaffifin. We find this in several other surah where the Quran talks about, alerts or points our attention to, if you will, a social reality. Is that those who defy God and those who sin rarely do it on their own. But they most often have a social clique, a group of people who give them comfort and who give them a sense of insolence about what they're doing. You deserve this. You're entitled. Go for it. Why not? This type of stuff. So we find this in several surahs in the Quran. في أهله مسرورا. The idea that when on this earth you gave priority to that sense of heedless joy, irresponsible joy. You are going to have fun regardless of whether it's something that is pleasing to Allah or not, regardless of whether you're going to hurt people or not, regardless of whether you're going to do something right or not. And you had your community that supported you. And the subtext here that the Quran often raises elsewhere very explicitly is, where are those people now? إِنَّهُ كَانَ فِي أَهْلِهِ مَسْرُورًا always begs the question, okay, so yeah, you had a clique that encouraged you and egged you on and that made you feel entitled on earth, but where are they now? إنه ظن أن لا يحور. A fascinating expression. إنه ظن أن لا يحور. What is this person's main issue, whether Muslim or not Muslim? What is this person's main problem? Fundamentally, when all is said and done, is that this person did not believe that they would return. Al-Hawar is a person returning back to a place. So one of the Prophet ﷺ used to have a dua where he would say, أعوذ بالله من الحور بعد الكور, which means that I seek Allah's protection from need after having enough. Al-Kawar is to have enough. Al-Hawar is where you are in need. There's also an expression that in Old Arabic, Al-Hawar ba'd al-Kawan. Al-Hawar ba'd al-Kawan is when someone becomes not good after having been good. A kawan is someone who is wholesome. And al-hawar in this situation is when someone, after having been a wholesome human being, good human being, a decent human being, becomes a bad human being. So here, أَنَّهُ ظَنَّ أَنْ لَا يَحُورُ. This person thought that there is no return, and that there is no return that would put him or her in a position of disadvantage. As so many theologians have commented over the centuries of Islamic wisdom, that very rare do you have people with 100% certitude in resurrection and accountability. To the extent a human being sins, it is often in proportion to the extent of their doubt about resurrection. The more seriously and certain they are about it, the harder it becomes to take your relationship with Allah for granted. The more a person weakens, it's the same. It's, even if there is resurrection, well, Allah will forgive it anyway. But it's the idea of God at the moment that a person is sinning is rendered obscure. And the very idea of accountability is rendered remote and far. Okay. إِنَّهُ ظَنَّ أَنْ لَا يَحُورُ. So we understand this. They thought they're not going to return. They thought they're not going to be at a disadvantage. They thought this entire dynamic of a changing reality, a continuing act of creation. I underscore this because of the assumption that so many Muslims have that somehow the hereafter we will be human beings in the way we are now, and that's not a fair assumption. We just don't know. Allah is capable of creating an endless set of possibilities. And we know that we will remember. We will have memory. We will have accountability. We will have rationality. Or in other words, we will maintain enough of who we are as beings. But what is the reality? What does it mean to exist in an atmosphere that doesn't work through breathing oxygen? Who knows? What does it mean to exist in an atmosphere that doesn't work through gravity and the power of gravity? Who knows? And we don't need to know. If you truly believe in Allah, then you believe that is Allah capable of. And again, I'll tell you, we're going to come back to this in 1 second. Okay. بلى إن ربه كان به بصيرا. So Allah reminds us, Basir is the seer of all, that throughout this process of kadh, throughout the process of progression towards the divine, at every stage of life, through all the ups and downs, Allah was ever watchful of us and knows everything that involved our lives. There is, in this context, a set of reports that probably are worth flagging, that a lot of these reports come by the way of the Prophet's wife Aisha radiallahu anha, but there's different versions of it, and some of the versions come by the way of other companions. But basically the issue is that the Prophet ﷺ, in commenting about Surah Al-Inshiqaq, said, or is reported to have said, that if a literal translation, man su'ila uzib, whoever is questioned will be punished. So in one of the versions of these reports, Aisha tells the Prophet ﷺ, but doesn't it say that if you receive your book to the right, then your hisab will be yasir. In other words, your accountability will be, or your questioning will be minimal, and that you will receive the good news. And the Prophet ﷺ is reported to have explained that إن ذلك في العرض الأول, as the report says, that it is not all the same, meaning that there are those that are, if you want to be like clear shoo-ins, the people who receive the good news and they're told you have minimal sins and Allah has forgiven them, go ahead. But that if you are interrogated about your sins, that you will have a bill to pay. Now, of course, as you can imagine, that terrified. We have reports of people reacting to this and being very worried at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, because they took these things very seriously. Hopefully we do as well, but anyway. But that, the reason I flag this, because one, these reports are, they have, transmission-wise, are of different degrees of soundness, so we can't just say that they're unsound or unreliable. So it's likely that the Prophet ﷺ did say something like that. That's one. Second is that it's consistent with being confronted with one's sins and having to see a full embodiment of these sins, and that the interrogation, as we said, will involve the vindication of the rights of others, the rights of God, the rights of people, and the rights of the self. But especially while the rights of God are solely within the exclusive domain of God, the rights of people is where a lot of the questioning will be implicated. And as we'll talk about later in different contexts, the idea that but for the grace of God, that there is a bill to pay, is a very serious one, and one should take it very seriously. One should not assume that it is simply that, okay, all is forgiven, just go ahead. One needs to worry about what needs to be paid and what needs to be settled. Okay, so we get the rhythm of the surah up to this point is like, it's a very quick beat, boom, 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 and it delivers it's not the main unusual, or I don't want the main thing that is new so far is إِنَّكَ كَادِحٌ إِلَى رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا فَمُلَاقِيهِ. The others are common themes, quick reminders that again put human beings before their accountability in a very serious way, until we get to the series of oaths that Allah takes. فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالشَّفَقِ وَاللَّيْلِ وَمَا وَسَقَ وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا اتَّسَقَ لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ. And here is where we get to the very serious or heavy part of the surah. But before we do that, let's take a 2-minute break. So, at this point, the surah is gearing up towards its main point. And we have فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالشَّفَقِ وَاللَّيْلِ وَمَا وَسَقَ وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا اتَّسَقَ. If most translations will say Allah is swearing by shafaq, twilight, وَاللَّيْلِ وَمَا وَسَقَ, the night and what it gathers. Let's see what it say. And the night and what it enshrouds in the study Quran. And وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا اتَّسَقَ, and the full moon. But we have to pause here because of, again, the language being used is remarkable. First, I'm going to just read in a passage from Arabic for the Sufi-esque interpretations, and then I'll explain. But so here's what I think this is Tafsir Jilani. I had copied it, but I had not written who the author was, so it must be Jilani. It sounds like it. Anyway. الشفق المنبئ عن الشفقة والترحم الإلهي، وهو البياض المعترض من أفق عالم اللاهوت عند انقضاء نشأة الناسوت، حين حكم سبحانه بانطواء سجلات التعيينات والهويات، أي أقسم بالليل، أي مرتبة الأعماء الإلهي، وما وثق أي ضم وجمع من الأنوار المنعكسة إليها هياكل الأشباح، أي أقسم أيضا بالقمر، أي الوجود الكلي الإضافي المنبسط عن مرآة العدم، والقمر المنعكس من شمس الذات الأحدية المتشعشعة المتعشعشة المتجلية عن مطلع الفضاء اللاهوتية، إذا تم وعمم وشمل الكل وصار بدرا كاملا بلا نقصان. أيها المكلفون لا تطرحن في نار القطيعة والحرمان طبقة عن طبق. I'm not going to translate this line by line because it would take too long and wouldn't be very productive. But the point first is shafaq, the idea of the shafaq itself. فلا أقسم بالشفق. الشفق could mean the light that remains of the sun as it's coming down. But from the word shafaq is also the word shafaqa, which means compassion or mercy. So it could be that Allah is swearing by the process of the sun coming down, the night, and the various stages of the moon until we have a full moon. And if so, then this oath would be consistent with the idea of everything is in motion, everything goes in stages. That is the nature of creation. And that if you reflect on the intricate balance of how things move from one stage to another in an endless cycle until reality itself changes, that is a clear indication of the divine. But elsewhere, the Quran swore by the interchange of night and day and did it in language that was different and far more clear than this language. Why? Because a shafaq connotes either the sun coming down or the twilight of something, and with a connotation of the some connotation of mercy. Let's leave it at that for now. وَاللَّيْلِ وَمَا وَسَقْ, and the night, but it's not swearing by the night, but the night and what it enshrouds or what it unfolds. What is within the night? And that's a question that a lot of commentators or interpreters thought about. So what is it that goes on in the night? As some said, well, in the night, people do a lot of haram things, and people also do things like Salat al-Tahajjud at night. So they either worship more or in fact do. And the various stages of the moon, and until the moon gets to that stage where it is a full moon, a reflecting full light from the sun. And that oath to tell us لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ. لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ is the only time that the Quran uses this expression, and it is truly remarkable. You will literally, if you want, it's as if it's saying you will go from one plate, if you want, if very, very literal, you say you're going from one plate to another. A little bit non-literal, you say you're going from one plane to another. If you go a little bit more towards the meaning, you'd say you're going from one reality, one state of being to another. There's a contemporary Muslim who wrote a book, I think you can find it on Amazon, called The Quran and UFOs or something like that. And he says, see, the Quran says that we are eventually going to all get onto UFOs and, travel to another planet or something. Because in Arabic, a UFO is called tabaq ta'ir, flying plate. Tabaqan an tabaq. So, obviously, I'm not saying that because I agree with him. Just to make an obvious point. You will, in fact, go from one plane to another, from one reality to another, from one state to another, from one stage to another. It is as if the Quran is telling us that we have no frame of reference to how dramatic the transformations that we will undergo are. So the oath taken must relate to the point made. So what is the oath in light of the point made? First, فَلَا أُقْسِمُ بِالشَّفَقِ. As the sun goes down, the vestiges of light start disappearing. And as the vestiges of light start disappearing, the night is in full swing, and the night has a great deal of complexity. The light of the moon is partial and incomplete until it reaches the point of ittisaq. And ittisaq is doesn't just mean a full moon, but it also means a state of equilibrium or a state of balance or measurement. So and here I'm part of this is you like the quote I read from probably Jilani has elements of the meaning I'm going to explain, but the meaning I'm going to explain differs in some important respects. What the quote that I read says is that it is describing a state of, or warning about us about a state of spiritual transformation where eventually you grow into a state of enlightenment. So that's what that quote is getting at overall. But I'm tying the meaning specifically to Surah Al-Inshiqaq and what it was telling Muslims at this point in their development. The oath is by a state in which the light starts to fade. And when the light starts to fade, you have the complexity of the night and what it conceals, and all the various, often inconsistent elements that are found in the night. And the process by which eventually one can be guided by the light of a full moon, which combines a personal determination of the individual to be guided by the full moon, because if you don't want to be guided by the full moon, it will pass like any other night, plus Allah's purposeful intervention in making the stages of light evolve until you have a full moon. And that oath precedes لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ. The least that can be said about طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ is that you are going to go through major transformations and major challenges. Now, think of the moment that Surah Al-Inshiqaq is revealed. As the next stage unfolds in the life of Muslims, they will be tested and challenged. For many of them, it will be as if the night has come about. You're talking about war and poverty and loss of homes and an extreme set of tribulations. That night could be a night in which they grow until the full moon comes about. Or it could be a night in which they get lost, as in fact happened exactly for a lot of Muslims as they confronted the reality of the Hijrah. And then the warning, لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ. You are going to go through major transformations. But that is the expression, the language here has a double connotation. As you go on the process of jihad, your life will experience major turbulence. Your reality itself will completely change, time and again. But there's also another warning that goes back to the beginning of the surah. Remember that the very nature of Allah's sunnah in creation is change and transformation. In existence, you transform naturally from child to adulthood to old age to death to resurrection. The expectation is that إِنَّكَ كَادِحٌ إِلَى رَبِّكَ كَدْحًا فَمُلَقِيهِ, is that you will struggle, or you should struggle, on the path of your Lord until you confront your Lord, or meet your Lord. Those of you who expect a path of least resistance or entitlement or comfort, well, they will also ride tabaqan an tabaq, but it will not end with a Badr wal qamari is a tasaq, the enlightenment of the Badr, which in Arabic, there and in Quranic usage, often a full moon is associated. You know, there in love songs we say Ya Aini, what is that? Ya Amar, what? No, Ya Aini, Ya Lili. Amar means like something beautiful. When you want to say someone is beautiful, you say Amar. But it always means Badr, it's full moon. You don't. If you want to insult someone, you'd say you're half a moon. You're half of, you know, or you're just a sliver of a moon. You know, that doesn't mean they're beautiful. It means they're ugly. So a full moon is like when you want to say someone is beautiful. So if you don't accept the path of qat' and you have an attitude of entitlement, well, the tabaq an tabaq that you will be forced to ride is a transformation from the state of whatever state you were in to the state that is described at the beginning of the surah. The bad news, the sense of isolation, the sense of extreme anxiety, the fear, the punishment, the tribulation of realizing that you have a bill to pay, the constant wondering of when is my bill going to be paid up, at what point is God going to say, okay, you've suffered enough, you don't have to stay in hell anymore. It's a turbulence. If you want a definition of turbulence, it's exactly that, is that you would end up in not a short-term anxiety, but literally anxiety without a foreseeable end until Allah wills, or until Allah takes mercy upon you. But those who will accept and will heed the warning, لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ, now, and understand what that entails, and understand what entails the challenge of the night and the gift of the full moon that will come, and the irony of all ironies is, do you know when the full moon, the real Badr, comes in the life of Muslims? It is at the time that they as Muslims will dominate the world. But that's not going to happen until the Prophet ﷺ dies. So even when the full moon comes out, and the real hardship has ended, they're no longer, every one of them has to be going to war or giving most of their income to the war effort or whatever. A new challenge comes because the adbaq never end. Now there's a different type of tabaq an tabaq. Now the challenge goes back to the challenge of luxury and the challenge of justice, and whether they're going to side with the right causes, whether they're in fact going to get spoiled by all the money, whether they're going to lose their path. لَتَرْكَبُنَّ طَبَقًا عَنْ طَبَقٍ. In one single phrase, it summed up the Quranic outlook. That as long as you are on this earth, your philosophy must match the expectation of constant movement and constant transformation. If you stagnate, you're left behind by the Quranic outlook. That's why Sheikh Muhammad Ghazali, rahmahullah, Allah yarhamu, used to say, of all the receivers of divine books, the idea that Muslims would stagnate is a complete oxymoron, because no book warned its followers that the nature of life on this earth is constant transformation, and that they must always be ready to meet the challenge of transformation and utilize the opportunity for enlightenment like the Quran. And that is why then it comes and says, so now if you understand this, so wouldn't be the most natural thing that if you hear the Quran is to prostrate, it's to fall into sujood. But there's another message in this revelation. There are going to be people who listen to the Quran and not prostrate. And there are going to be people who listen to the Quran and prostrate. But what does listening to the Quran prostrate connote? What does it mean? What does it entail? It is not the physical act of prostration that is an issue. The issue is now that next stage, are you going to be guided by the Quran like the constitution of your life? Or not? That's what فَإِذَا قُرِئَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقُرْآنُ لَا يَسْجُدُونَ connotes. That's the emphasis. That either you are, if in this next stage where you are going to, and we, in Medina, the Quran will rev up to have surahs like Baqarah and Al-Imran and An'am and so on that actually will be intimately addressing all types of affairs for Muslims and demand that in fact that they demonstrate that they live constitutionally through the Quran and by the Quran. About the Sajdah when we get to this point, if you're reading the surah in prayer, or if you're reading it, reciting Quran to yourself, when you come to this point, فَإِذَا قُرِئَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقُرْآنُ لَا يَسْجُدُونَ, you're supposed to stop and do a sajdah, do sujood. So in prayer, we do sujood when we get to that point. There is some disagreement about Surah Al-Inshiqaq and this Sajdah. For the Malikis, they said there are 11 parts in the Quran where there is a Sajdah. And Surah Al-Inshiqaq is not one of them. So for the Malikis, they said, when you say فَإِذَا قُرِئَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقُرْآنُ لَا يَسْجُدُونَ, if you're a Maliki, you don't do sujood, or you don't have to do sujood. You can if you want. For the Shafi'is and Hanafis and Ja'faris, they said that there are 14 parts in the Quran where you have to do a sajdah, and one of them is Surah Al-Inshiqaq. For the Hanbalis, they said 15 parts in the Quran where you have to do sajdah, and one of them is Surah Al-Inshiqaq. So, in other words, all but the Malikis don't believe, or all but the Malikis believe that you have to do a sajdah in Surah Al-Inshiqaq. The Malikis make it optional. Just as a side thing. This is, of course, in the realm of ahkam. And then after فَإِذَا قُرِئَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْقُرْآنُ لَا يَسْجُدُونَ, which now the Quran had delivered the main message of Surah Al-Inshiqaq, it affirms that again, there are people that are not going to believe that Allah is always aware of their state. It doesn't escape God. It doesn't happen outside of God. That their fate is known. And إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم أجر غير ممنون. We notice again, as had already occurred, for instance, in Surah At-Tin, and as will often be re-emphasized in the Quran, Iman is always coupled with good deeds. There is no such thing in Islam as Iman without good deeds, or good deeds without Iman. لهم أجر غير ممنون, that they will be given reward, unconditional rewards, or which, for in Sufi-esque tafsirs, they consider the unconditional reward is to allow to gaze upon the face of Allah and to be embraced into Allah's enlightenment, and that is the height of rewards. While of course, in other tafsir they leave it. But that's it. That's Surah Al-Sajdah. Oh, Surah Al-Inshiqaq. Why did I say Sajdah?
We're talking about Sajdah.
Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much again for an amazing surah. It's like so many. It's like not enough time in the day to process everything. Does anyone have questions here to get started?
My question is just elaboration on the ahkam of the sajdah. So like sometimes you read reports of like smart or naughty children who are being chased, by like a parent or something because they've done something bad, and then they recite like a verse from, for example, Surah Al-Inshiqaq that has the obligatory prostration, and then that is their opportunity. You read these funny stories of like then the parent feels that they have to do the prostration and they can't reach the kid to discipline them, for example. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the specifics of the ahkam. Is it that if you're reading or reciting, or if you hear something in the car, for example, if you're listening to Quran in the car, what are the ins and outs of this sort of thing? And then a second bit of that, if there's a way to tie in the idea of when one makes an error in prayer, the Sajdah Sahw afterward, what is the procedure of doing so?
The Sajdah,
Just to paraphrase.
no, the question about the rules for, like, if you have to do an obligatory Sajdah, what are the parameters for it? Because people say it's obligatory, and then the second question is about Sajdah Sahw. Sujood al-Sahw is when you make a mistake in prayer and then you do a Sajdah because of the mistake. When for instance you see Quran reciters, people who are reciting Quran in a professional context, and they come to a verse with a sajda, they don't interrupt the recitation and do a sajda. And the reason for that is the sajda is something that you do if you are in prayer, or if you are reciting the Quran individually, and it is reasonable to do so. So there is no, if you fail to do the sajda, it's not like leaving a fard, like not praying. It's not that you incur a sin, but it is, in the opinion of even older school, it is a makruh, that it is something that is disfavored, especially if you leave it, if you fail to do it without an excuse. So, I mean, if you're praying and let's say you read Surah Al-Inshiqaq, and let's say that you are in fact a Hanafi or a Shafi'i, and so you do believe that you should do a sajda, and you don't do the sajda, your prayer is still valid. And you don't necessarily incur a sin for having failed to do it, but if you do it regularly, then it could be something that would count against you. So it is among those things that some have said it's a sunnah mu'akkada, that it's highly praiseworthy. But there's, I don't know too many scholars that have said that it's actual sinful thing to leave it out. But so the parameters, I mean, if you're reading, I once was in a meeting, and I think it was Surah Iqra, Surah Al-Alaq. And I think I don't remember why I was reciting it, but anyway, we came to a sajda, and someone in the meeting wanted to stop the meeting and do a sajda, and that's not the type of thing that is that's not what is meant by you don't just break everything and do a sajda. It's if you are reciting Quran to yourself or you're doing it in prayer. These are the two main occasions when you do sajda. Sujood al-sahw is a different thing altogether, and it has a lot of rules, because forgetting but basically there are certain things that in prayer, if you forget, then the prayer has to be repeated. Like if you forget to do the Fatiha, then the prayer has to be repeated. Sujood al-sahw, there are, if you are not sure whether you've prayed 3 or 4 rakahs, and according to the majority, then you do sujood al-sahw, plus you err on the side of completeness rather than shortness. Or if you, in the opinion of some, if you leave out reading a short surah after the Fatiha, or if you forget to do ruku'ah, for instance, these are all parts of things that you do sujood al-sahw for. And sujood al-sahw is basically like an extra sujood, but there's sajdatan, so sujood and you sit up and then you do sujood again, because you made a mistake in prayer or you forgot something in prayer. But there are a lot of technical rules that have to do with it. So for instance, if you are if after the 3rd rak'ah you sit up for Salat Ibrahimiyya, and then you remember that you needed to pray another rak'ah you need to get up again for the fourth rak'ah. Well, if you started reciting the Salat Ibrahimiyya and then you remembered, then you interrupt the recitation of Salat Ibrahimiyya and you get up and you do your fourth rak'ah and you do sujood al-sahw. But if you haven't started reciting the Salat Ibrahimiyya and then remembered, before you started reciting Salat Ibrahimiyya, then you get up, you do your fourth rak'ah and you don't need to do sujood al-sahw. So the best thing is that if something comes up, is to ask someone that knows these rules, because they tend to get rather technical.
Is that everything? Okay. Anybody else? Henry, have a question?
Where's my chicken?
Where's your chicken?
My question is about فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ. Why is عذاب a bushra? Like something that comes up multiple times in the Quran.
Yeah, most commentators say that
I'll paraphrase the question.
the question is, what it says فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ, but when you say bashirhum, usually gives them the good news. And bushra is something that you deliver good news with. So the question is, why does it say فَبَشِّرْهُمْ? Because it's like, it's not good news that they're going to be punished. So the use of فَبَشِّرْهُمْ is notable. And most commentators say that this is partly you can use the expression bashirhum to deliver bad news if you intend an insult by it, or you intend to mock someone or insult someone. So if I say أبشرك بهزيمة النكراء, that I will give you the bushra that you're going to be defeated soundly, I am not just telling you you're going to be defeated, but I'm also sort of insulting you, that it's not sarcasm, it's not really mocking, but it's or if I say if you tell someone if you say if you don't study you're going to fail, you don't say أبشرك بالفشل. That would not be very good use of language, because you're simply, that would be a misuse of bushra. But if you say, if you keep playing, you're going to fail, then you can use bushra. So you say, so in other words, I am emphasis here. Bushra is used for emphasis. That if you keep doing what you're doing, you're going to fail. So here, when you use bushra in that context, it's like underscoring the failure. So in this context, it's either as an insult, فَبَشِّرْهُمْ بِعَذَابٍ أَلِيمٍ, or as an emphasis that is in fact going to be the fate, that it is unavoidable and most certainly going to be happening.
Question?
The surah starts out with descriptions of the sky and the earth both being ripped apart, and after then verses about like the day of judgment and accountability, it comes back to the images of the sky, but in a more peaceful context. And it seems like, I guess I want your opinion on, is one of the main takeaways of the surah is it's a commentary on the nature of transformation, that it's not just the sky that is going to be ripped asunder. And this is kind of, I'm getting this logic from the way that you approach Surah Al-Takwir, that especially at this point in Muslims' history and what they're going through, to consider the personal sundering that you're going through and what that might mean. That this is not just a situation of life facing you with difficulty, but this is actually the entrance and the opening into a new state of being.
Yeah, no, that is yeah, I'm happy you brought that point up. That is a good point. It is very much, Surah Al-Inshiqaq is, and we know this even from the way that the Muslims around the Prophet ﷺ at the time received Surah Al-Inshiqaq, that they took it as heralding some major transformations. And it's interesting because while Surah like Surah Al-Ankabut, for instance, told them that the Hijrah is going to require major sacrifices, Surah Al-Inshiqaq was telling them something about their inner beings, that they're going to be, that the changes are going to be psychological. I mean, it's from, and when, of course, in retrospect, when we think of someone who, people who their entire life could have consisted in leading a band of Meccans to raid a fellow Arab tribe in a war of vengeance, or often in these skirmishes between the tribes, followed it complete. I mean, it required a consciousness that is very different than going and meeting the armies of Persia or meeting the armies of Byzantium. The Arabs, for a long time, had not dared confront the armies of Byzantium or the armies of Persia, and not only that, but for a long time had, and in fact for as long as anyone can remember, had been out of the game of civilization itself. I mean, they were fairly a closed cultural paradigm. They would interact with the Byzantines and they would interact with the Persians, but Arab culture remained Arab culture. It remained an illiterate culture. They didn't rely on writing very heavily. They didn't keep records. They didn't have their own form of currency. They didn't have their own bureaucracy. They didn't have their own administration. They didn't, other than the themes of poetry that they now, they are going to literally be a people that are going to be like a sponge, taking in cultures of all types of people, and their attitude is going to have to be very different from the typical classic tribal Arab attitude of my family and my tribe first and last, and it's the beginning and the end and the all, and I don't care what you're bringing me, I'm going to incorporate nothing from you because I build my entire identity on who my father was and my grandfather was and who my tribe is and so on, to suddenly now they're going to be welcoming converts of all types of languages and colors and ethnicities and cultures, and they're going to be transforming very quickly, literally, tabaq on tabaq. So in retrospect, it's remarkably right on. It's exactly like, if you wanted to get a more perfect expression of what they're going to go to go through, you couldn't come up with one. But of course, that required an enormous amount of social upheaval and cultural upheaval, and it's reflected in both the production of material culture, meaning high culture, and also in the fact that they had a lot of wars that they fought internally, because with a lot of social upheaval, people have that nasty habit of starting to fight with each other. But it is, again, to the power of the Quran that, unlike so many other conquering political entities, empires, that appeared on the scene, won a bunch of battles, and then the minute it came to the point of production of culture, they collapsed. That's not what happened with Muslims. And it tells you that the battles turned out to be very marginal to the life of Muslims, because it continued on for centuries as a major civilization. And I think that's the power of the Quran. That's when you see the extent to which Muslims were poring over the Quran, studying the Quran, reflecting on the Quran, it tells you that this book was working its magic among them for a very long time.
Is there a dhikr for this
No.
chapter? Okay. Any other questions here? Okay. How would one know if they begin becoming not good following being wholesome and a good human being? And so in reference to the analysis on verse 14, how might one know if they are regressing, and how can they avoid it?
I mean, well, that question is very broad. I mean, you can definitely go through the checklist. First, I think, I'll give you a partial checklist, the things I can think of right now, but definitely the first thing you check is whether you're keeping your ibadat. Things like your salah, your zakah, and I underscore zakah because a lot of people who do their salah, stinginess will start creeping into their lives, and it's much harder to catch yourself being materialistic and stingy than missing salah. But then the other major thing is there is a very powerful litmus test. Think of how much good you do vis-a-vis others. It's not about being good to yourself. And it's not about how much time you spend in dhikr or worship. How much time or how much lying do you engage in? How much ill will do you engage in? How much resentment do you have? How much jealousy do you have? Do you think of other people and feel compelled to dislike and to hate and to backbite and to malign and to slander? Do you hurt, or do you make people happy or make people sad? And it's very concrete. If you wake up and you notice that you are the type of person that don't like to smile at people, you don't like to greet people, you don't like to say kind things to people, you don't like to help people, you don't like to render assistance, you don't like to elevate the hardship and alleviate the hardship upon people, then that's probably a very good sign that you're gravitating towards the bad. It is not remember, amanu wa amilu salihah, that do good. Constantly, Allah couples the two. Because the iman is an state in which you can easily delude yourself. It is when we are required to invest, we are required to pay a price as a reflection of that iman. It's very easy for iman, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, it becomes a form of imsak. In other words, it becomes a form of iman, that it becomes a form of feeling superior to others. And that is really not good. When your iman or your ibadah basically makes you feel grouchy towards the rest of the world because they're all inferior to you. How do you cure that? Service. I was trained through service. I lived until all my life with the philosophy of service. I will die with the philosophy of service. For me, Islam begins with service and ends with service. The day that you no longer serve, then you are not a good Muslim. A Muslim serves. That's what is a Muslim. That's what a Muslim does.
Thank you. Okay, Saddam, if I understand right, only Malikis don't do a physical sajda when reading the surah, but if we do sajda while reciting Quran, are there specifics for how to do surah? I've seen people just lower their heads while reading Quran. I've seen others praying 2 rakahs.
No. This type of sajda is not praying 2 rakahs, and it's not lowering the head. No. If you're going to do the sajda for, and in modern Qur'ans, the way they indicate it is that they'll often, if you look at your copy of the Qur'an, this is, I think, now has become fairly standard. You'll find that they draw a line over the words. When you see that line over the words, that means do a sajda. Of course, most Qur'ans are printed according to the Hanbali school because of Saudi influence. So you have 15 such markings in the Qur'an, which is, okay, more sajdas don't hurt, right? Good. But the sajda is literally, you literally stop. If you're standing up in prayer, you just go right to sujood. You don't go do ruku'ah. If I'm sitting reading the Quran, I will put the Quran down and I will go like this. A number of times, and then I will sit up. That's it. That's the sajda. That's required. Yeah. It's one sajda. It's not a sajda broken into 2 parts, but it's a one sajda. It's not 2 rak'ahs, it's not just lowering your head. Anyone that lowers their head, they're not doing it right. Anyone that prays 2 rak'ahs, that's not the sajda, that's just nafl, that's just extra prayer.
Great, and could the Sheikh explain some of the deeper meanings of the sajdas while reciting the Quran and why they appear in certain verses?
This is this is in the realm more of law, but basically there are several parts where the Quran says, and it's always the sajda occurs in parts where the Quran says something to the effect, the Quran being recited and people failing to do sujood, or that the Quran being recited and people should do sujood. And so the it always, in all the instances that whether debated or not debated, there is Quri al-Quran or something to the effect that the Quran being read or the Quran being heard, and then the word yasjudun or tasjudun or sajidun or something like that. In other words, a variant on the word sujood. And the Prophet ﷺ ordered all these reports from a wide range of companions, from either wives of the prophets to companions like Abu Huraira to Ja'far al-Sadiq to Imam Ali to a whole range of Ibn Abbas has Abu Dharr al-Ghafari has a number of these words that the Prophet ﷺ, as he would pray, when he would recite فَإِذَا قُرِئَ القُّرْآنُ لَا يَسْجُدُونَ, he would stop and do sujood. And we don't have reliable hadith where the Prophet ﷺ instructs people to say, when you recite this, do sujood. But we have the practice. And that's why you have that issue as to the nature of that obligation. Is that it's something that we know from cumulative sources that the Prophet ﷺ would regularly do. That he would come to these parts of the Quran that would say when the Quran is recited they fail to do sujood, or when the Quran recited they should do sujood, and he would do sujood. And now, was the Prophet ﷺ doing this as a sign of respect to the Quran, or was it like some other, like some of the sunan, like Sunnat al-Maghrib or Sunnat al-Fajr, something that the Prophet ﷺ was doing because we should follow suit? And it's a sunnah mu'akkada, it's something that the Prophet ﷺ was underscoring. And to make a long, a long juristic back and forth about it, is that the majority basically said, well, if it wasn't something that we should follow, the Prophet wouldn't have done it publicly and done it regularly and done it in jama'ah prayer and done it in individual prayer. So it's like being reactive to the Quran, but we also know that there were certain situations where the Prophet ﷺ didn't do the sajdah, like when he would recite, they would be preparing for battle, and the Prophet ﷺ would read Surah Alaq, for instance, and he wouldn't do the sajdah. So then jurists, in studying these types of precedents, they extrapolate rulings. And that's how you get the whole issue of the sajdah.
Thank you. Does the Sheikh believe there is a qualitative difference between the psychological and spiritual transformations the Sahaba went through and the kind that we must go through in the modern day?
I think every age, there is no, human psychology is very context specific. And, I wonder what type of psychological, when you read, for instance, the stories about some of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ who would, after the hijrah, they literally went from a life of riches to rags. But rags in their age meant extreme rags. So some of them would, when they would die, they wouldn't have even a piece of clothing that they can be buried in that's long enough to cover their entire body. Or in that day and age, when you talk about psychological transformations where you have to learn how to fight with a sword and strike with a sword and things like that, our transformations are quite in our day and age. I mean, qualitatively, no, they're no less drastic in the sense of having to learn to live for a cause and to sacrifice and to give and to be committed and to be dedicated. We have a lot to learn from them, everything to learn from them. But what does it mean for someone today to develop the psychology that would enable one to use a knife in combat, for instance? I mean, that's meaningless. In this day and age, the type of psychological transformation that you should go through probably is the one that would enable you to build an intelligent drone that can be used electronically from, get Muslims to join the modern age. One of the things that killed me, I gave a khutbah about it, but it killed me, is that one can predict that, there are going to be all these Muslim countries who their dictatorial governments are going to talk about, like the Egyptian government, where it said, oh, we invented a cure to COVID, and we are giving it to the Chinese. And everyone knew it was a lie, in the same way they claimed they invented a cure to AIDS. And if I don't know if you guys remember when the Egyptian guy who came up and said, oh, we take COVID and feed it to a patient like a kufta, and it's so stupid. You can look it up, but everyone knew that it's going to be. But you could predict that it's going to be non-Muslims who come out with a vaccine for COVID, and that kills me, because if Muslims would learn what is required, if they would learn the lesson from the Sahaba, they would be the one that would be at the forefront of saving the world from COVID, if they would learn the lesson from the Sahaba. But what this would require is that Muslims would demand governments that actually spend their money on scientists and scientific research, instead of bribes and corruption, and instead of buying Rolls-Royce from Europe and expensive cars and expensive furniture. It required that Muslims would take accountability and responsibility for their lives. Instead of saying, oh, you have to obey Wali al-Amr, whoever is in power, and whatever they do, you can't question them. They would say, no, Allah put us in charge and put us the khulafa on this earth, and if our rulers don't spend enough money so we can invent a vaccine for COVID, then these rulers should not be in power. And so the type of tabaq on tabaq that we're talking about, if we study what the type of transformations that the companions went through, they learned how to be winners in life and in the hereafter. They learned how not to be losers. That's the part that we need to learn. How not to be losers. Because there is no question that as Muslims, you talk about the field of philosophy, history, medicine, chemistry, biology, any field, and we're losers. I mean, even in the field in my field, legal theory, and why? It's not that we lack intelligence. It's not that we lack intelligence, but our sense of priorities, what we learn from our Quran and what we learn from our Seerah, is all geared towards stroking our egos and making ourselves feel good and feel falsely superior and falsely content with ourselves, and oh, we're okay and the rest of the world, no, the rest of the world we're deluded. Because we're not following the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and the sunnah of the companions. They taught us, or taught, if we wanted to follow their sunnah, we would learn to be winners in this world and in the hereafter. That's what the Quran taught them. And that's what, the reason that I go back to the tafsir of Quran is because we've lost that.
I think that's a good place to stop, unless anyone has any burning questions. Thank you so much, Sheikh, for another incredible evening. And we will see everybody Saturday, inshallah.
Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.